Teenage mom kicked out by parents is rescued by an eccentric elderly woman. What happens next is beautiful. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. The Alaskan snow fell in merciless sheets, transforming the world into a white blur. At a deserted bus stop on the outskirts of Anchorage stood 17-year-old Olivia Morgan, her thin jacket pulled tight around her body, and more importantly, around the tiny bundle in her arms. Her 2-month-old daughter, Lily. The temperature had dropped well below freezing. The last bus of the night hadn't arrived, and Olivia had nowhere to go. "Shh, Lily, please. I know you're cold. I'm trying, baby. I'm trying." Her voice broke as tears froze on her cheeks. 3 hours earlier, she had been standing on her parents' porch watching her father throw her duffel bag into the snow. "No daughter of ours will bring such shame to this family." Her father's voice had been cold, colder than the winter air around them. Behind him, her mother stood with tears streaming down her face, but making no move to defend her daughter or granddaughter. Olivia had hidden her pregnancy for months. The family's pristine reputation in their conservative church community had meant everything to them, apparently more than their only daughter and her newborn baby. When finally discovered, her parents gave her an ultimatum: give the baby up for adoption or leave. She chose her daughter, but now, as the snow piled higher and the night grew darker, that choice felt impossibly heavy. Her best friend Mackenzie couldn't take her in. Lily's father, a college freshman who had blocked Olivia's number the moment she told him about the pregnancy, was certainly not an option. Olivia began walking, her inadequate sneakers sinking into the snow. Each step felt like a prayer, a desperate plea that someone, anyone, might help them before the Alaskan winter claimed 2 more lives. Lily's cries had quieted to whimpers, which somehow frightened Olivia more than her screaming. "Stay awake, baby. Please stay awake." The headlights appeared like distant stars, growing larger as a vehicle approached. A battered blue pickup truck slowed beside her, its engine rumbling. The driver's window rolled down with a mechanical whine, revealing an elderly woman with wild silver hair escaping from beneath a knitted hat and mismatched gloves on her weathered hands. "You two look like you're in a proper pickle, aren't you?" the woman called out, her harsh Alaskan accent cutting through the howling wind. Olivia hesitated, clutching Lily closer to her chest. The truck looked ancient, its blue paint peeling in places, and the bed was piled high with what appeared to be strange items covered by a tarp. The woman behind the wheel wasn't exactly reassuring either. "I don't bite, girl," the woman called out. "But that storm sure will. It's dropping 10 degrees an hour out here." As if to emphasize the point, Lily let out another cry, this one weaker than before. "I'm Maeve Callahan," the woman said, her voice softening slightly at the sound of the baby. "That little one won't last another hour in this weather." Maeve was right, and Olivia knew it. With trembling legs, she trudged through the snow to the passenger side of the truck. When she opened the door, she was hit with a wave of warmth from the heater and the strange sight of the truck's interior. The dashboard was covered with small figurines, what looked like hand-carved animals, some antique dolls with unsettling glass eyes, and several crystals hanging from strings. The back seat was stacked with books, papers, and what appeared to be, Olivia blinked in disbelief, a taxidermied owl perched atop a cardboard box. "Well?" Maeve raised an eyebrow. "In or out? I can't heat all of Alaska." Olivia climbed in, awkwardly settling with Lily in her arms. The truck smelled of pine, tobacco, and something earthy she couldn't identify. "Where are you headed?" Maeve asked, putting the truck in gear. Olivia's voice caught. "I don't know." Maeve studied her for a long moment, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. They were striking eyes, pale blue, almost silver, like the winter sky. "No home then?" Olivia shook her head, tears threatening again. "Not anymore." Maeve nodded once, as if confirming something to herself, then turned her attention back to the road. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the snow. "I'm 20 miles outside town. Got a cabin. It's nothing, but it's warm. You two can wait out the storm there." Olivia should have been frightened. Every warning she'd ever received about strangers screamed in her head, but when Lily's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb, seeking warmth, what choice did she really have? "Thank you," she whispered. Maeve made a dismissive sound. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen where I live." The drive was mostly silent, save for Maeve occasionally muttering to herself or to the truck when it made concerning noises. The headlights cut through heavy snowfall, illuminating a world transformed into ghostly white shapes. They turned off the main road onto what was barely a path, winding through dense forest. You're not going to hurt us, are you?" Olivia finally asked, voicing her fear. Maeve barked out a laugh. "Girl, if I wanted to hurt you, I'd have left you at that bus stop. Nature would have done the job for me." She glanced at Lily, Besides, I don't hurt children. Never have. Never will. There was something in the way she said it, a heaviness, a history, that made Olivia believe her. The cabin appeared suddenly between the trees, its windows glowing with warm light. From the outside, it looked tiny, a simple A-frame structure with a steep roof to shed the snow. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. "Home sweet home," Maeve announced, parking the truck. Getting from the truck to the cabin was an adventure in itself, with the snow nearly knee-deep. Maeve forged ahead, creating a path for Olivia to follow with Lily. By the time they reached the porch, Olivia was exhausted and freezing again. Maeve pushed open the door, and Olivia stepped into a world unlike anything she'd ever seen. The cabin's interior was surprisingly spacious, much larger than it appeared from outside. But what made Olivia pause wasn't the size, but the contents. Every surface, every wall space seemed filled with things. Collections of rocks and shells, bookshelves overflowing with volumes in multiple languages, dried plants hanging from ceiling beams, strange artwork that looked both primitive and somehow scientific, a large work table covered with papers, magnifying glasses, and what appeared to be bone fragments. It was chaotic yet somehow organized, as if the entire space were the physical manifestation of a brilliant but scattered mind. "Close your mouth, girl. You'll catch flies," Maeve said, hanging her parka on a hook by the door. The central space was dominated by a large wood stove, radiating blessed heat. Maeve immediately went to work, stoking the fire higher. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to a worn but comfortable-looking armchair near the stove. Olivia sank into it gratefully, unwrapping Lily from her outer blanket. The baby's cheeks were red from the cold, her nose running. Without being asked, Maeve disappeared into what must have been a kitchen area, returning minutes later with a bottle of warm formula. "How did you?" Olivia began, staring at the bottle. "Figured that's what she'd need," Maeve said with a shrug. "Been a while, but some things you don't forget." As Olivia fed Lily, her maternal instincts warring with her exhaustion, Maeve disappeared again. This time when she returned, she was carrying what looked like a drawer, an actual wooden drawer, that she had lined with soft blankets. "Makeshift crib," she explained, setting it down near the stove. "Babies sleep better with solid sides around them. Feels secure." Olivia stared at her. "How do you know so much about babies?" Maeve's expression shuddered slightly. "I've known many beginnings and endings, child." Before Olivia could ask what that meant, Maeve was moving again, gathering supplies. She returned with a towel, some clothes that looked well worn but clean, and a bar of soap. "Bathroom's through there," she said, nodding to a door. "Water's hot if you're quick. Generator's working overtime in this storm." Only then did Olivia realize how disheveled she must look and smell. She hadn't showered properly since leaving home that morning. "I can watch the little one," Maeve offered, seeing her hesitation. "Been a while, but I haven't forgotten how to hold a baby." Trusting this strange woman with Lily seemed inadvisable, and yet there was something about Maeve that inspired confidence. A competence in her movements, a directness in her gaze that spoke of someone who had seen much of life and knew how to handle its challenges. "Her name is Lily," Olivia said, carefully transferring the now calm baby to Maeve's arms. "Lily," Maeve repeated softly, settling into the chair Olivia had vacated. "Hello there, little lily flower." The shower was glorious, the hot water washing away not just the physical grime, but some of the emotional weight of the day. When Olivia emerged, dressed in the borrowed clothes, which were too large but wonderfully soft, she found Maeve singing softly to Lily, an old folk song about mountains and rivers that Olivia had never heard before. "There's food on the table," Maeve said without looking up. "Nothing fancy. Soup and bread." Olivia hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. The soup, some kind of hearty vegetable and barley concoction, tasted better than anything she could remember eating. As she ate, she surveyed the cabin more carefully. One wall was entirely covered with photographs, mostly of Maeve in various remote locations, always alone, often with scientific equipment. She looked younger in the photos, but just as intense, just as present. Another thing caught Olivia's attention. A small door, different from the bathroom or what appeared to be Maeve's bedroom. It was painted blue and had a hand-lettered sign, "Eleanor's room. Keep out." "Who's Eleanor?" Olivia asked before she could stop herself. Maeve's hands stilled momentarily as she was tucking the blanket around Lily in her makeshift drawer crib. "No one you need to concern yourself with," she answered, her voice suddenly flat. "You'll sleep there tonight," she added, pointing to a daybed in the corner. "I'm through that door. I sleep light, so call if you need anything." The abrupt change in subject was clear. Eleanor was not a topic for discussion. As Maeve prepared for bed, moving around the cabin with the efficiency of long-established routines, she paused by Olivia's makeshift bed. "Just until the storm passes," she said, though something in her eyes, A knowing look suggested she understood it would be longer. The forecast says 3 days of this weather, maybe more. Thank you, Olivia said again, genuinely grateful despite the strangeness of it all. I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't stopped. Maeve's expression softened slightly. Get some sleep, girl. Tomorrow's another day. Later, as Olivia lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to Lily's soft breathing and the howling wind outside, she wondered what twist of fate had brought them to this place. The day had begun with her world falling apart, yet here they were, safe, warm, and somehow found by perhaps the only person strange enough to take in a teenage mother and baby during a blizzard without question. Just before sleep claimed her, Olivia's gaze drifted once more to that blue door with its warning sign. Who was Eleanor? And what had happened to make Maeve Callahan, a woman who clearly knew how to care for babies, live alone in the Alaskan wilderness surrounded by scientific specimens and memories? Days turned into a week as the storm raged on, trapping them in the cabin. What had seemed like a temporary refuge became, of necessity, something more. Olivia learned that survival with Maeve Callahan came with structure and expectations. I'm not running a hotel, Maeve announced on the second morning, handing Olivia a broom. Everyone works here. Despite her gruff manner, Maeve proved to be an unexpectedly patient teacher. She showed Olivia how to maintain the wood stove, explaining the different types of wood and how they burned. Pine burns hot and fast, good for getting things going. Birch lasts longer, gives a steady heat. You always want a mix, she explained, demonstrating how to arrange the logs. When not tending to Lily, Olivia helped with chores around the cabin. She learned that the peculiar collections had purpose. The rocks were geological specimens, the dried plants were both medicinal and for research, and the bones belonged to various Arctic animals Maeve had been studying for years. You're a scientist? Olivia asked on the third day, as they preserved vegetables from Maeve's root cellar. Am. Depends who you ask, Maeve replied, expertly slicing carrots. Professor of Arctic biology at the university in Fairbanks for 20 years. Retired early to do my own research. What kind of research? Climate effects on Arctic ecosystems, changes in plant cycles, animal migrations. Maeve gestured to her workbench. Been documenting it for 3 decades now. Changes that took centuries are happening in decades. Nobody wanted to hear it back then. And now? Now they're listening, but it's almost too late. She handed Olivia another carrot, thinner slices. They'll dry better. On the 4th day, the satellite phone rang, a startling sound in the otherwise quiet cabin. Maeve answered with terse responses, mostly yes and no, and finally, "We're fine, Thomas. Don't risk the trip yet. Thomas brings supplies sometimes," she explained after hanging up. "Good man. One of the few people I can tolerate for more than an hour." Olivia tried calling her friend Mackenzie on Maeve's satellite phone, but the connection was spotty. She managed to learn that her parents had told everyone she was away at a special school, their euphemism for erasing her from their lives. On the 5th night, Lily developed a slight fever. Olivia panicked, but Maeve remained calm. "Babies get fevers. It's how their bodies fight," she said, examining Lily with surprisingly gentle hands. "Not dangerously high, probably just adjusting to the new environment." She prepared a lukewarm bath for Lily, adding something that smelled like mint to the water. "Helps open the airways," she explained. By morning, Lily's fever had broken. When Olivia expressed her amazement, Maeve simply shrugged. "Natural remedies work when you know what you're doing. Modern medicine has its place, but people survived for thousands of years before antibiotics." Over time, Olivia began to notice Maeve's more peculiar habits. She talked to her plants as she watered them, addressing each by scientific name and sometimes having entire conversations with them. She named the animals that occasionally appeared outside their windows, a particular fox she called Archimedes, and a raven she greeted as Einstein. Sometimes she spoke in what seemed like riddles. When Olivia mentioned feeling trapped by her circumstances, Maeve responded, "Freedom isn't the absence of walls, it's having the strength to climb them." Then she went back to writing in one of her many journals if she hadn't said anything profound. At night, Olivia sometimes heard Maeve moving around the cabin, talking softly to herself, or perhaps to someone only she could see. Once, she found her sitting by the window at 3 a.m., watching the aurora borealis painting the sky in greens and purples. "The light spoke to the ancient ones," Maeve said without turning around. "Told them stories of the cosmos. We've forgotten how to listen." Despite these eccentricities, or perhaps because of them, Olivia found herself growing comfortable in Maeve's presence. The woman was odd, certainly, but also brilliant, capable, and in her own prickly way, kind. Lily seemed to thrive under their combined care. Away from the stress of hiding her existence and the tension of her parents' home, Olivia found herself more relaxed as a mother. Lily gained weight, became more alert, and even began what Maeve identified as social smiling. Not gas, Maeve insisted when Olivia suggested that might be the cause of Lily's grin. She's responding to you, recognizing her person. On the 10th day, the storm finally broke. Sunshine spilled through the windows, illuminating dust motes and casting the cabin in a warm glow. The snow outside sparkled like diamonds. Thomas will make it through tomorrow, Maeve announced after checking something on a weather radio. He'll bring supplies and news. The unspoken question hung in the air. What would Olivia do now? The storm was over. The immediate danger had passed, but she still had nowhere to go. That evening, as Lily slept in her drawer crib, which Maeve had improved with small wooden rails, Olivia found the courage to ask about the journals she'd noticed. They filled an entire bookshelf, leather-bound volumes with dates spanning decades. Are those your research notes? Maeve, who was knitting something with multiple colors of yarn, nodded. Partly. Observations, thoughts, data. I've documented every weather pattern, plant growth cycle, and animal sighting on this land since 1983. Would it be okay if I looked at one? Maeve's knitting needles stilled. Then, with a slight nod, she said, the green ones are purely scientific. The brown ones are personal. Stick to the green. The journal Olivia selected was filled with Maeve's precise handwriting, detailed drawings of plants, charts tracking temperatures and precipitation, and observations so meticulous they bordered on poetry. This is amazing, Olivia said honestly. You should publish this. Maeve snorted. I did for years. Academic journals, research papers. Then I stopped. Why? Got tired of committees and peer reviews and university politics. Science shouldn't be about whose name is on the paper or who gets funding. It should be about truth. She resumed her knitting, the needles clicking rhythmically. Out here, I answer to no one. Research is pure. Olivia flipped through more pages, pausing at a detailed drawing of a flower. This is beautiful. I didn't know scientists could draw like this. In the old days, all scientists were artists too. Da Vinci, Audubon, Darwin. They observed and they created. Modern specialization has made us forget that science and art are just different ways of seeing the same world. As Olivia returned the journal to its shelf, her gaze drifted once more to the blue door. In 10 days, she had explored every part of the cabin except what lined it. The keep out sign had kept her away, but her curiosity grew daily. Maeve, she began carefully, I know it's none of my business, but that room, Eleanor's room, is Eleanor your? The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Maeve's hands froze mid-stitch, her face becoming a carved mask. You're right, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. It's none of your business. She stood abruptly, setting aside her knitting. I'm turning in early. Make sure the fire's banked before you sleep. The door to Maeve's bedroom closed with finality, leaving Olivia alone with her regrets in the main room. The next morning, the atmosphere remained tense. Maeve was civil but distant, focusing on preparations for Thomas's arrival. Olivia tried to help, keeping Lily content and staying out of Maeve's way. Mid-morning, they heard the sound of an engine. Through the window, Olivia saw a snow machine pulling a small sled loaded with supplies, driven by a man in heavy winter gear. Thomas, it turned out, was not what Olivia had expected. He was native Alaskan, perhaps in his 50s, with laugh lines around his eyes and a quiet, thoughtful manner that seemed to balance Maeve's intensity. So you're the guests Maeve mentioned, he said, his deep voice warm as he removed his gloves to greet them. Thomas Casquet. I teach at the high school in town when I'm not making deliveries to hermits in the woods. Who are you calling a hermit? Maeve grumbled, but there was no real heat in it. Did you bring the coffee? 2 pounds, dark roast, and something else you'll appreciate. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small stuffed polar bear toy. For the little one, my wife insisted. Lily, secured in a makeshift carrier Maeve had fashioned, blinked at the toy with fascination. Your wife has good taste, Olivia said, genuinely touched. Thank you. As they unloaded supplies, Thomas and Maeve fell into what was clearly a familiar routine. They moved around each other with the ease of long acquaintance, communicating in half sentences and knowing glances. Later, over cups of steaming coffee, which Maeve declared almost adequate, Thomas brought news from town. The storm had been the worst in years, causing power outages and property damage. Schools had been closed for a week. The community center is still serving as a shelter for those who lost power, he mentioned, watching Olivia carefully. They have resources for people who need temporary assistance. The implication was clear. There were options for Olivia and Lily if they wanted to leave. Before Olivia could respond, Maeve cut in. The girl and her baby can stay here until she figures out her next move. No need for shelters and social workers poking into her business. Thomas raised an eyebrow. That's generous of you, Maeve. It's practical, she countered. I've got the space. She helps with chores. The baby's no trouble. Olivia felt a surge of relief, followed quickly by uncertainty. Maeve was offering continued shelter, but was it what was best for Lily? Living in this remote cabin with an eccentric older woman might not be the most stable environment for a baby. And yet, in the past 10 days, Lily had thrived. Olivia had learned more about practical care from Maeve than from all the parenting books she'd secretly read. And despite Maeve's gruff exterior, there was genuine kindness beneath. If you're sure it's not an imposition, Olivia said carefully, we'd be grateful to stay a little longer, just until I can make a proper plan. Maeve nodded once, as if the matter were settled. Thomas watched this exchange with thoughtful eyes. Before leaving, he took Olivia aside while Maeve was organizing the supplies. Maeve doesn't let people in easily, he said quietly. She must see something in you and your daughter. She's been very kind, despite her tough exterior. Thomas smiled slightly. She's had her share of hardships, made her prickly but also compassionate in her own way. He glanced toward the mysterious blue door, then back at Olivia. Be patient with her. There are old wounds there. After Thomas departed, promising to return in 2 weeks, the cabin settled back into its rhythm, but with subtle differences. Maeve seemed more deliberate in her teaching, showing Olivia not just how to maintain their immediate needs but skills for longer-term survival. Knowledge is the only thing they can't take from you, she said as she demonstrated how to identify edible plants in a field guide. Money, shelter, relationships, all can be lost, but what's in your head stays there. As December deepened and Christmas approached, Olivia realized something unexpected. She had begun to see the cabin as home. She missed certain comforts of her previous life, but not the constant tension, the feeling of being a disappointment, of living a lie to protect her parents' reputation. Here, with Maeve, there was no pretense. The older woman had no interest in appearances or social standing. She valued competence, honesty, and direct communication. If Olivia did something wrong, Maeve told her immediately and showed her how to correct it. If she did something well, Maeve acknowledged it with a nod or brief word of approval. It wasn't conventional. It certainly wasn't what Olivia had imagined for herself and Lily. But on nights when the aurora danced across the sky and the cabin was warm against the cold, when Lily slept peacefully in her improved crib and Maeve shared stories of her research expeditions across the Arctic, Olivia felt something she had rarely experienced before. She felt at peace, yet always in the background of this growing contentment was the question of Eleanor's room. Who had she been? What had happened? And why did Maeve, who clearly knew so much about caring for babies, live alone in the wilderness with only a blue door and a warning sign to mark what seemed a significant loss? Winter deepened, transforming the landscape into a crystalline world of white and blue. Inside the cabin, life fell into comfortable patterns. Olivia's 18th birthday passed with little fanfare, just a small cake Maeve somehow produced, and a handmade card from Lily, featuring the baby's inked footprint. Thomas visited regularly, bringing supplies and news. Sometimes he stayed for dinner, sharing stories about the high school where he taught history and traditional knowledge. Through him, Olivia began to learn about the local community beyond what she had known from her sheltered upbringing. The school has a good program for young parents, he mentioned one evening. Several students continue their education while raising children. Olivia's heart quickened at the thought. She had been a good student before Lily, with dreams of college that had seemed to vanish when the pregnancy test positive. How would that even work? She wondered aloud. I can't exactly show up at a new school with a baby and no guardian. Thomas and Maeve exchanged a look that Olivia couldn't quite interpret. There are ways, Thomas said carefully, if you were interested. The conversation shifted, but the seed had been planted in Olivia's mind. Maybe, just maybe, her education wasn't over. January brought the coldest temperatures yet. The generator strained against the demands, and Maeve monitored it constantly, making adjustments and minor repairs. Old beast, she muttered affectionately to the machine. Just a few more weeks. You can do it. One particularly brutal night, with temperatures dipping below -30, the inevitable happened. The generator sputtered, coughed, and died with a final whine. Damn, Maeve said with surprising calm. Knew this was coming. The cabin grew steadily colder as the heating system failed. The wood stove provided heat for the main room, but the bedrooms quickly became uninhabitable. We'll all sleep near the stove tonight, Maeve decided, dragging mattresses into the main area. Body heat and proximity to fire will keep us warm enough until morning. I can fix it then. As they prepared for a cold night, Maeve instructed Olivia to find extra blankets. check the trunk by my bed, and the storage cabinet in the bathroom. With Lily securely bundled in a nest of blankets near the stove, Olivia searched for more warm coverings. The trunk contained several quilts, which she carried to the main room. The bathroom cabinet yielded towels but no blankets. Running out of options and feeling the biting cold, Olivia remembered seeing a chest in Maeve's room that she hadn't checked. Inside were wool blankets and something else, a leather-bound book, different from Maeve's journals. When she moved it aside to reach the blankets beneath, the book fell open, revealing a hollow center, and inside that center, a key, a small brass key with a blue ribbon tied to it. Olivia stared at it, her heart pounding. She knew, without having to be told, what door this key would open. She should have just taken the blankets and closed the chest. She should have respected Maeve's privacy, her clear boundaries. But the mystery of Eleanor's room had grown in her mind over these months, and now, with the key literally in her hands, curiosity overwhelmed caution. Taking the key and the blankets, she returned to the main room. Maeve was busy with the wood stove, her back turned as she arranged logs to maximize heat through the night. "Found these in your bedroom chest," Olivia said, setting down the blankets. "I'll check if there are more in the storage closet." The storage closet was near Eleanor's room, a convenient excuse. Heart racing, Olivia moved quickly down the hallway with a flashlight. The blue door seemed to glow slightly in the beam of light. The "Keep Out" sign stared back accusingly. She hesitated, hand trembling as she raised the key to the lock. This was wrong. This was a violation of trust. And yet, the key turned smoothly, as if the lock had been regularly maintained, despite the prohibition against entry. The door swung open with a soft creak. Olivia's flashlight beam swept across the small room, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a nursery, a perfectly preserved nursery from another time. The walls were painted a soft yellow, decorated with a hand-painted mural of forest animals. A wooden crib stood in the center, covered with a patchwork quilt and surrounded by stuffed animals. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a handmade Afghan draped across its back. Shelves lined one wall, filled with children's books from the 1980s. A changing table held neatly stacked, yellowing diapers and baby clothes. It was as if time had stopped in this room decades ago, holding the space in perfect suspension. On a small dresser, silver-framed photographs caught the flashlight's beam. Olivia moved closer, her heart pounding. The largest showed a much younger Maeve, perhaps in her 30s, holding a newborn baby. Despite her exhausted appearance, her face radiated a joy that Olivia had never seen on the older woman's features. She looked, transformed by love. "Eleanor," Olivia whispered, finally understanding. "Yes, Eleanor." Olivia whirled around, nearly dropping the flashlight. Maeve stood in the doorway, her face unreadable in the dim light. Olivia braced herself for anger, for outrage at this invasion of privacy. Instead, what crossed Maeve's features was something more devastating, a profound, bone-deep sorrow. "I'm so sorry," Olivia began, but Maeve raised a hand to silence her. "It's done now," she said quietly. She stepped into the room, moving with the care of someone entering sacred space. Her fingers trailed over the crib rail, straightened a stuffed bear, adjusted the Afghan on the rocking chair, automatic gestures that spoke of countless previous visits. "You had a daughter," Olivia said softly. Maeve nodded, picking up the silver-framed photograph. "Eleanor Grace Callahan, born the 14th of July, 1986, 3 hours of labor, 7 pounds exactly." Her voice took on a distant quality. "She had my eyes but her father's smile, not that he ever saw it." "I'm sorry," Olivia said again, feeling the inadequacy of the words. "I shouldn't have come in here." "No, you shouldn't have." Maeve sighed, settling into the rocking chair. The weight of memories seemed to press her deeper into the seat. "But perhaps it's time. Secrets have a way of surfacing, like air bubbles under ice." In the main room, Lily made a small sound. Olivia glanced back, torn between her responsibility to her daughter and her need to understand Maeve's story. "Go," Maeve said. "Check on Lily. Make sure she's warm enough. I'll be there shortly." When Olivia returned to the main room, she found Lily still sleeping peacefully, unaffected by the adult dramas unfolding around her. She adjusted the blankets and added another log to the wood stove, then waited. Maeve emerged from Eleanor's room several minutes later, carrying the silver-framed photograph, and looking older than Olivia had ever seen her. She sat heavily on the mattress near the stove, the picture cradled in her weathered hands. "I was 34, she began without preamble. "A promising academic career, tenure track at the university. I specialized in Arctic ecosystems, spent summers doing field research, winters teaching and publishing." Her voice was flat, as if reciting facts from one of her journals. "I wasn't married, didn't particularly want to be, but I did want a child." She looked up, meeting Olivia's eyes. This was the 1980s. Single motherhood by choice wasn't widely accepted, especially in academic circles. Women were still fighting to be taken seriously as scientists. Having a baby without a husband was career suicide. "So what did you do?" Olivia asked softly. "I had a colleague, brilliant botanist, good friend. We had an arrangement for a while. When I got pregnant, he made it clear he wanted no part of parenthood. Fine by me. I never told anyone at the university who the father was. Wore loose clothes, scheduled my field research to coincide with the later months. When I was 8 months along, I took a sabbatical, supposedly to write a book." Maeve's fingers traced the edge of the photograph frame. "I came here, to the cabin. It belonged to my grandfather originally. I renovated it, prepared the nursery, read every book on childbirth I could find. And then, on a July night much like this one, cold despite the season, Eleanor arrived." "You gave birth alone here?" Maeve nodded. "Not the smartest decision in retrospect, but I was stubborn, convinced I could handle anything." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "She proved me wrong from the first contraction, taught me that some forces of nature can't be controlled, only surrendered to." The stove crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind howled, creating an eerie backdrop to this unveiling of long-buried pain. "We had 3 beautiful years," Maeve continued. "I took a position at a smaller college, one that didn't ask too many questions about my personal life. We lived in town during the week, came here on weekends and holidays. Eleanor thrived. She was speaking in full sentences before she was 2, knew the names of a dozen Arctic plants, could identify bird calls." Maeve's voice broke slightly. She took a deep breath before continuing. "The winter she turned 3, we came here for Christmas. A storm hit, much like the one that brought you to my door. Eleanor developed a cough that quickly worsened. By the second day, she had a high fever. I tried everything, cool baths, herbal remedies, the medications I had on hand. Nothing worked." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing generator. She glanced at Lily, peacefully sleeping, and couldn't imagine the terror Maeve must have felt. The phone lines were down, the roads were impassable. By the 3rd day, she was struggling to breathe. Maeve's eyes had taken on a glazed, distant look. "I wrapped her in blankets and tried to make it to town in my truck. We made it 5 miles before getting stuck in a snowdrift. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of unimaginable loss. She died in my arms, waiting for help that came 2 hours too late." Olivia couldn't stop her tears. She thought of Lily, of the fragility of life, of how easily their story could have ended differently if Maeve hadn't driven by that bus stop. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. The official cause was pneumonia complicated by an undiagnosed congenital heart defect. Maeve continued, her voice clinical now, as if the only way to tell this story was to distance herself from its emotional core. "The doctors said she would have needed specialized care even if I'd reached the hospital sooner. They said it wasn't my fault." She looked down at the photograph in her hands. "But it was. My stubbornness, my need to prove I could do everything alone. It cost my daughter her life." "No," Olivia said firmly. "You couldn't have known about her heart. You did everything you could." "Did I?" Maeve's gaze was piercing. "I chose isolation because it was easier than facing judgment. I put my pride above practical considerations. I thought I knew better than everyone else." She shook her head. "After Eleanor died, I abandoned my career, my research, everything. I retreated here, to this cabin. I preserved her room exactly as it was the day we left for the hospital. For years, I spoke to almost no one." "What changed?" Olivia asked. "Time," Maeve said simply. "And Thomas. His family has lived in this region for generations. He started bringing supplies after finding me half-starved one winter. Refused to let me disappear completely. Eventually, I started doing research again, on my terms, outside the academic establishment. Found purpose in documenting the changes to this land." She set the photograph carefully on a small table near the mattress. "But I never let anyone into Eleanor's room, never spoke her name aloud, until tonight." Olivia reached out hesitantly and placed her hand over Maeve's weathered one. To her surprise, the older woman didn't pull away. "Maybe she sent us to you," Olivia suggested softly. "Maybe we were meant to find each other." For a moment, Maeve's scientific skepticism battled with what might have been hope in her eyes. "I don't believe in such things," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why did you help us that night?" Olivia pressed. "You could have driven past." Maeve was silent for a long moment, considering. "When I saw you in the snow, holding Lily, it was like seeing myself from the outside, from another time. A young woman, alone with a baby, facing impossible odds." She shrugged slightly. "I couldn't save my daughter, but perhaps she sent you to me. so I could help save yours." The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and profound. Then Lily stirred, making small noises that signaled she would soon wake fully, hungry, and demanding attention. "I'll warm a bottle," Maeve said, rising with surprising energy. The moment of vulnerability was over, but something had fundamentally changed between them. As they settled in for the night around the wood stove, Lily fed and content between them, Olivia felt a strange sense of rightness. They were an unlikely trio, a teenage mother, a grieving scientist, and a baby born into uncertainty. Yet somehow they fit together. "What happens now?" Olivia asked into the near darkness, the question encompassing far more than just their immediate plans. "Tomorrow, I fix the generator," Maeve answered pragmatically. "After that," she paused, considering. "After that we make choices, better ones than I made before." It wasn't a promise exactly, but as Olivia drifted toward sleep, warmed by the fire and the presence of these two beings who had become her unlikely family, she felt something she hadn't experienced since the day she discovered she was pregnant. Hope. Outside, the aurora borealis painted the sky in veils of green and purple, dancing above the cabin where three souls, one young, one old, one just beginning, had found each other against all odds. Spring came to Alaska in fits and starts. Snow melted, revealing patches of earth that had been hidden for months. The days lengthened dramatically, with sunlight stretching into the evening hours. Birds returned from their southern migrations, filling the forest with song. In the months following the revelation of Eleanor's story, subtle but significant changes transformed both the cabin and its inhabitants. Maeve fixed the generator as promised and then turned her attention to more surprising renovations. "If you're staying through spring," she announced one morning in March, "we need to make some proper accommodations." Olivia, feeding Lily at the table, looked up in surprise. "I don't want to impose more than we already have." Maeve waved away her concern. The drawer crib was fine for an emergency, not suitable for a growing baby. She unrolled a paper on the table, a sketch for a proper crib. "I've got the wood. Thomas can bring the tools I'm missing." What began as a crib project expanded into a comprehensive renovation of the cabin's sleeping arrangements. The daybed where Olivia had been sleeping was replaced with a real bed. A corner of the main room was transformed into a play area for Lily, complete with a handmade activity mat designed to stimulate cognitive development. According to Maeve, most significantly, the door to Eleanor's room remained unlocked. Maeve didn't dismantle the preserved nursery, but she no longer treated it as a sealed shrine. Sometimes Olivia would find her sitting in the rocking chair, holding one of Eleanor's toys, not with the devastating grief of before, but with something closer to bittersweet remembrance. "She would have been 35 this year," Maeve remarked once. "I wonder what she would have become. A scientist, perhaps. Or maybe something entirely different." "Tell me about her," Olivia encouraged. "What was she like?" And for the first time in decades, Maeve began to share stories of Eleanor, her first steps, her favorite books, her habit of categorizing pine cones by size. The telling seemed to bring Eleanor back into the world of the living, transforming her from a frozen memory to a child who had been deeply loved. As the natural world awakened around them, so too did Olivia's thoughts of the future. Staying with Maeve had been necessary during winter, but spring brought new possibilities and new responsibilities. Lily was growing rapidly, becoming more alert and engaged with her surroundings. She would need socialization, medical checkups, and eventually, education. Thomas became an unexpected ally in Olivia's tentative planning. During his visits, he brought not just supplies but information about the local high school's program for young parents, about medical resources in town, about potential paths forward. "The spring semester starts in 2 weeks, he mentioned in April. "If you're interested, we could arrange for you to finish your senior year. Part remote learning, part in person when I could drive you." "Is that even possible?" Olivia asked. "I don't have my records and legally. Let me worry about the bureaucracy," Thomas said with a slight smile. "I've been teaching there for 20 years. I have some influence." "And Lily? What would I do with her while in class?" Thomas glanced at Maeve, who was pretending not to listen as she recorded observations in one of her journals. "I think you might already have a willing childcare provider," he suggested quietly. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Olivia approached Maeve with the idea. She expected resistance, or at least practical objections. Instead, Maeve's response surprised her. "It's about time you thought about your education," she said, not looking up from her journal. "Babies are important, so is knowledge." "You'd really be willing to watch Lily while I'm at school?" Olivia asked, hardly believing it could be this simple. Maeve finally looked up, her expression serious. "I've been observing you for months now, Olivia. You're a good mother, attentive, patient, intuitive, but you're also clearly intelligent, with an analytical mind. Abandoning your education would be a waste. It was perhaps the most direct compliment Maeve had ever given her. Olivia felt a flush of pride, quickly followed by practical concerns. But there are so many complications. I don't have legal guardianship established. I don't have health insurance for Lily. I don't even have my birth certificate or school records. Paperwork, Maeve dismissed with a wave of her hand. Bureaucratic hurdles, nothing that can't be overcome with the right approach. The right approach turned out to involve a series of steps that Olivia would never have imagined possible. First, with Thomas's help, Maeve contacted a lawyer in Anchorage who specialized in family law. After a lengthy consultation, a plan emerged. We need to establish legal guardianship, the lawyer explained during a conference call. Given that you're 18, Olivia, you have legal autonomy for yourself. But having an adult guardian who can act in your interests for matters like school enrollment will simplify things. Maeve, to Olivia's continued surprise, volunteered immediately. I can be her guardian, temporary or permanent, whatever works best. The process required documentation, birth certificates, school records, evidence of Olivia's living situation. Some of these they obtained through official channels. Others required more creative solutions, including a trip to Olivia's former home while her parents were at work to retrieve essential documents she'd hidden before her departure. Standing on the doorstep of the house she'd grown up in, using the spare key still hidden under a fake rock, Olivia felt like a thief in her own past. The home seemed smaller than she remembered, the carefully curated decor more sterile than comforting. She moved quickly, retrieving her birth certificate from its hiding place in her old desk, along with school records and the baby book she'd started for Lily. As she was leaving, she noticed something on the mantel, a family photograph with her face cut out, as if she had never existed. The visual confirmation of her erasure stung more than she expected. On impulse, she left behind the sonogram image of Lily she'd carried in her wallet, placing it exactly where her face had been removed from the family portrait. Let them remember what they chose to throw away, she thought as she closed the door behind her. By May, the legal arrangements were in place. Maeve became Olivia's temporary guardian, allowing her to enroll in the high school's flexible program for the final weeks of the semester. The arrangement was unusual enough to raise eyebrows, but with Thomas's advocacy and the school's desire to support teen parents, exceptions were made. 3 days a week, Thomas would drive Olivia to school on his way to work. She would attend essential classes, meet with teachers about remote assignments, and return to the cabin in the afternoon. The other days, she would study from home, with Maeve surprisingly stepping into the role of tutor for science and mathematics. Your textbook is outdated, Maeve remarked, flipping through Olivia's biology materials. The sections on ecological systems don't reflect current research at all. Here, use these instead. She provided several books from her personal library, adding, just because you're learning remotely doesn't mean you should receive an inferior education. Lily, meanwhile, thrived under Maeve's care during school hours. The woman who had once lived in isolated grief transformed into an engaged, if unconventional, caregiver. She created natural toys from wood and fabric, read scientific journals aloud to the baby, as if she could understand complex ecological concepts, and took her on field expeditions around the property, pointing out plants and wildlife with scientific accuracy. You're teaching a 7-month-old about photosynthesis? Olivia asked one day, returning from school to find Maeve showing Lily the interior structure of a leaf. Early exposure to scientific concepts enhances neural development, Maeve replied matter-of-factly. Besides, she seems to enjoy the colors and textures. Indeed, Lily was reaching for the leaf with evident fascination, her small face alight with curiosity that mirrored Maeve's own expression. Spring edged towards summer, bringing finals week and a decision point. Olivia had completed enough credits to graduate, barely, and with considerable effort, but what came next remained uncertain. The temporary guardianship would expire soon, requiring either renewal or a new arrangement altogether. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset, which now came near midnight, Maeve brought up the subject directly. You'll need to decide soon, she said, her eyes on the golden pink horizon. Fall semester applications for the community college are due next month. Olivia bounced Lily gently on her knee, buying time to organize her thoughts. The baby was sitting up independently now, reaching for everything within grasp, her personality emerging more clearly each day. I've been thinking about it, she admitted. College seems impossible with Lily, but staying here indefinitely isn't a long-term solution either. Why not? Maeve asked, surprising her. This cabin has housed 3 generations of my family. It could house yours as well. The offer hung in the air between them, momentous in its implications. Before Olivia could respond, Maeve continued. The university in Fairbanks has a program for student parents, childcare subsidies, family housing, flexible class schedules. You could study environmental science, biology, or whatever interests you. She gestured toward the forest spreading below them. This land will still be here on weekends and holidays. Olivia stared at her, struggling to comprehend what she was hearing. Are you saying you want us to stay? Permanently? Maeve shifted uncomfortably, clearly fighting her natural reticence. I'm saying you have options, more than you might think. She reached into her pocket and withdrew an envelope. This came for you yesterday. The envelope bore Olivia's name and the cabin's address, the first mail she had received since arriving. Inside was a letter from Mackenzie, her former best friend. Your parents finally told people the truth, Mackenzie wrote. Not by choice. Someone from church saw you at the grocery store with Lily. There's been drama, obviously. Your mom called me crying, asking if I knew where you were staying. I didn't tell her anything specific, just that you were safe. She says they want to talk to you. The letter continued with updates about their old friends, school events Olivia had missed. And finally, whatever you decide, I've got your back this time. I should have done more when your parents kicked you out, I'm sorry. Attached was a note with Olivia's parents' new phone number. They had apparently changed it after she left. They want to reconcile, Olivia said, her voice hollow. At least, my mom does. Maeve's expression remained neutral. That's one option, she said carefully. You could return to your previous life. Or, she hesitated, or you could continue building the new one you've started here. Before Olivia could respond, the satellite phone rang from inside the cabin, an unusual occurrence in the evening. Maeve went to answer it, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts and the setting sun. When Maeve returned, her expression was grim. That was Thomas. He had an unexpected visitor at his house today. A young man asking questions about the teenage girl with the baby who supposedly lives out near his teaching route. Olivia's heart stuttered. Did he give a name? Jackson Williams. Said he's been looking for you since he discovered through social media that you'd had his baby. Lily's father, the college freshman who had blocked her number when she told him about the pregnancy, now suddenly interested in finding them. What did Thomas tell him? Olivia asked, holding Lily closer instinctively. Nothing specific, but the boy was persistent. Thomas thinks he may have followed him part of the way here today. Might show up tomorrow. The news landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the tentative peace Olivia had found. Jackson's reappearance complicated everything. He had legal rights as Lily's father, rights that could disrupt all their carefully laid plans. What do I do? She asked, suddenly feeling 17 again, young, scared, overwhelmed by adult decisions. Maeve sat back in her chair, her face thoughtful. That depends on what you want, Olivia. Not what Jackson wants, not what your parents want, not even what I want. Her gaze was steady. What future do you envision for yourself and Lily? The question hung between them as the sunset faded and the long Alaskan twilight began. Lily, oblivious to the adult complexities swirling around her, reached for a dragonfly hovering near the porch railing, her face alight with wonder. The next morning brought exactly what they had anticipated, Jackson's arrival. His car appeared on the long driveway around noon, the unfamiliar engine sound alerting them before he came into view. Maeve had prepared for this moment with characteristic thoroughness. You don't have to speak to him if you don't want to, she reminded Olivia. This is private property. He has no right here without invitation. But Olivia had made her decision during the night, after hours of consideration. I need to face him, for Lily's sake. Jackson Williams stepped out of his car looking nothing like the boy who had charmed Olivia at a party almost 2 years ago. He was thinner, more serious, his collegiate sweatshirt and neat haircut creating the image of responsible young adulthood. When he saw Olivia on the porch with Lily in her arms, he stopped mid-stride, his expression a complicated mix of emotions. Liv, he said, using the nickname from their brief relationship. I've been looking everywhere for you. That's strange, Olivia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Since you blocked my number when I told you I was pregnant. To his credit, Jackson winced. I know, I was an idiot. I was scared and immature and, God, is that her? Is that my daughter? His eyes were fixed on Lily, who regarded this stranger with cautious curiosity. Her name is Lily, Olivia said. She's 9 months old. Would it be okay if I held her? Maeve, who had been silently observing from the doorway, stepped forward. Why don't we all sit down and have a conversation first? I'm Maeve Callahan, by the way. This is my property you're standing on. Her tone made it clear that Jackson was being evaluated and found potentially wanting. He nodded, suddenly looking younger and less confident. They moved to the porch chairs, an unlikely quartet. Jackson explained that he had learned about Lily through a mutual friend's social media post that mentioned Olivia and her baby being spotted in town. I realized what I'd done, he said, his eyes moving between Olivia and Lily. Running away from my responsibility. I'm not that person anymore. I've grown up a lot this past year. What exactly do you want, Jackson? Olivia asked directly. To be part of her life, to help support her. He leaned forward earnestly. To make things right. What followed was a complicated conversation about Jackson's vision for their future. He had plans that sounded reasonable on the surface but revealed fundamental misunderstandings about Olivia's current life. I've got an apartment near campus, he explained. My parents are helping with rent. You and Lily could move in. The community college has daycare. You could take classes while I finish my degree. And where do I fit in these plans? Olivia asked. Besides being Lily's caretaker, Jackson looked confused. You'd be taking classes too. We could make it work, Liv. My parents feel terrible about how I handled things. They want to help. So your parents know about Lily? They've accepted the situation? Jackson shifted uncomfortably. They're coming around. They're traditional, you know. But a baby changes things. They want to meet their granddaughter. As he continued outlining his vision of their future, one where Olivia would essentially put her own dreams on hold to accommodate his education and career path, Maeve observed in silence, her expression growing increasingly skeptical. Only once did she interject, when Jackson suggested that his mother could help with childcare, since she raised 4 kids. Olivia has been Lily's primary caregiver since birth, Maeve pointed out. She's quite capable. Oh, of course, Jackson backpedaled. I just meant for support. Throughout the conversation, Olivia noticed something telling. Jackson spoke constantly about what he wanted, what his parents wanted, what society expected, but rarely asked what Olivia wanted or needed. And more significantly, he never once inquired about Lily's routine, her personality, her development, or the life they had built over the past 6 months. When Jackson finally held Lily, awkwardly, nervously, the baby regarded him with the solemn assessment of infants encountering strangers. She didn't cry, but she kept looking back at Olivia and Maeve, her known sources of security. She's amazing, Jackson said, genuine awe in his voice. She has my eyes. She has her own eyes, Maeve corrected quietly. After Jackson left, with promises to return the next day, Olivia sat heavily in the porch chair, emotionally drained. What do you think? She asked Maeve, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet throughout much of the visit. The older woman considered her response carefully. I think he's trying, in his limited way. But I also think his vision of the future centers himself, not you or Lily. He's her father, Olivia said, feeling the weight of that biological reality. Biology isn't destiny, Maeve replied. Trust me on that. The following day brought another unexpected development, a call from Olivia's mother, who had gotten the cabin's number from Mackenzie. Olivia? Is it really you? Her mother's voice sounded thin and strained through the satellite phone connection. It's me, Olivia confirmed, her emotions a tangled knot of longing and resentment. We've been so worried. Your father, he had a heart attack 3 weeks ago. The news landed like a physical blow. Despite everything, Olivia had never wished harm on her parents. Is he okay? He's recovering. It was minor, thank God. But it's changed him, Olivia. Changed us both. Her mother's voice broke. We made a terrible mistake. We want to make things right. Like Jackson's visit, the call ended with a request for Olivia to come home, to bring Lily, to be a family again. Her mother promised things would be different, that they had realized their error in choosing reputation over love. We have a room ready for you both, she said. We can help with college expenses. Your father wants to know his granddaughter. Yet through the warmth and apparent sincerity, Olivia noticed something similar to her conversation with Jackson. Her mother offered no actual apology for throwing her pregnant daughter out in winter. There was no acknowledgement of the trauma they had caused, just a desire to return to normalcy on their terms. After the call, Olivia found Maeve teaching Lily about different types of snowflakes using paper cutouts, despite it being June. My father had a heart attack, she said without preamble. They want me to come home. Maeve looked up, her expression neutral. And do you want to go? I don't know. Olivia sank into a chair, watching as Lily manipulated the paper snowflakes with growing dexterity. Part of me misses them. They're my parents. Another part remembers standing in the snow with nowhere to go. People can change, Maeve acknowledged. The question is whether they've changed enough to accept you and Lily as you are, not as they wish you to be. She set aside the snowflake activity and regarded Olivia thoughtfully. Do you want to go back because you miss them? Or because you think that's what a normal family should be? The question hit with unexpected force. Olivia had spent so much of her life trying to fit into her parents' definition of normal, their religious expectations, their social standards, their vision of success. Even her pregnancy had been evaluated primarily through the lens of how it affected their standing in the community. That night, Olivia dreamed of her childhood home, spotless, quiet, with plastic covers on the furniture and family photographs showing perfect smiles that never quite reached the eyes. She contrasted it with Maeve's cabin, chaotic, warm, filled with books and specimens and evidence of a life fully lived. In one, appearances mattered above all. In the other, truth was the only currency. The following week brought both Jackson and her parents to the cabin, a collision of past and present that Olivia had both dreaded and knew was necessary. Maeve prepared for their arrival with characteristic pragmatism, cleaning the main areas while leaving her scientific equipment and specimens prominently displayed. "This is who I am," she said, when Olivia suggested hiding some of the more unusual items. "And this is who you've become while living here. No reason to pretend otherwise." Her parents arrived first, their expensive SUV looking out of place on the rustic property. Her mother emerged cautiously, dressed as if for church in a floral dress and cardigan despite the casual setting. Her father moved more slowly, the recent heart attack evident in his careful movements and paler complexion. Their reaction to the cabin was exactly what Olivia had expected: poorly disguised dismay at the rustic conditions, questioning glances at Maeve's collections, tight smiles that suggested they were enduring rather than engaging. "So this is where you've been living?" her mother asked, trying to sound neutral but unable to hide her judgment. "This is where we found sanctuary," Olivia corrected gently, "when we had nowhere else to go." The introduction to Lily was awkward but touching. For all their faults, her parents seemed genuinely moved by their first sight of their granddaughter. Lily, now adept at sitting and reaching for objects of interest, regarded these new people with open curiosity. "She's beautiful," her mother whispered, tears forming. "She has your nose, Olivia." When Jackson arrived an hour later, the situation grew exponentially more complex. He had brought his parents, a surprise addition that immediately changed the dynamic. Suddenly, the cabin was filled with 3 sets of adults, each with their own agenda for Olivia and Lily's future. Jackson's parents were clearly uncomfortable in the remote setting but made efforts to appear supportive. His mother had brought baby clothes and toys, presenting them with the air of someone bestowing great gifts. "We want to be part of our granddaughter's life," she announced, with a pointed look at Olivia's parents. The territorial subtext was unmistakable. Maeve observed this unfolding drama with scientific detachment, offering coffee and simple refreshments while saying little. Yet her presence was a steady anchor for Olivia amidst the emotional crosscurrents. The conversations that followed were revealing. Both sets of parents outlined their visions for Olivia and Lily's future. Her parents offered financial support for college if she returned home, but with clear expectations about church attendance, appropriate behavior, and a tacit agreement that her mistake would be politely overlooked rather than accepted. Jackson's parents proposed a more progressive but equally controlled future, suggesting Olivia and Jackson should marry young, like they had, with both families supporting them through college. Their plan presumed Olivia would prioritize Jackson's education first, then pursue her own goals when the timing is right. Throughout these discussions, Lily became fussy, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar voices and tension. Without prompting, Maeve quietly took her outside to the porch, giving Olivia space to face these competing visions of her future. "I appreciate everything you're all offering," Olivia said finally, after listening to both families' proposals. "But I need to make decisions based on what's best for Lily and me, not what's most comfortable for everyone else." "Of course, dear," her mother said with a tight smile. "We just want to help you get back on track." "I'm not off track," Olivia replied with newfound confidence. "I'm on a different track than the one you planned for me. I've been accepted to the University of Alaska's science program with a scholarship for student parents. Maeve has been helping me prepare." This announcement was met with stunned silence, then a flurry of objections. "But that's so far from home. What about Jackson's role as a father? Already prepared a room for you both." Olivia held up her hand, a gesture she had learned from Maeve when discussions became unproductive. "Lily and I aren't a problem to be fixed or an embarrassment to be hidden," she said firmly. "We're a family, just not the kind you expected." When Lily began crying in earnest from the porch, the conversation naturally paused. Olivia joined Maeve outside, taking her daughter into her arms with practiced ease. "You're doing well," Maeve murmured, just loud enough for Olivia to hear. "Stand your ground." As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, though at this time of year it would not truly set, the visitors prepared to leave. The conversations had reached an uneasy pause rather than a resolution, with all parties agreeing to think things over. Before departing, Olivia's father asked to speak with her privately. On the porch, away from the others, He seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than the man who had thrown her possessions into the snow months ago. "I was wrong," he said simply, the words clearly difficult for him. "My heart attack. It makes you think about what really matters. I'm not saying I understand all your choices, but..." He glanced at Lily, now calm in Olivia's arms. "I don't want to lose my daughter and granddaughter because of my pride." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start, the first genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing from either of her parents. As the cars disappeared down the long driveway, Olivia felt a curious lightness. The conversations had been difficult, the competing expectations exhausting, but for the first time, she had maintained her boundaries. "You didn't tell me about the scholarship," Maeve said as they watched the last car disappear from view. "I just found out yesterday," Olivia admitted. "I was going to tell you tonight." Maeve nodded, something like pride flickering across her features. "Good. It's a solid program. Their environmental science department has improved considerably in recent years." Later that evening, as Lily slept and the endless summer twilight bathed the cabin in soft golden light, Olivia and Maeve sat on the porch, the events of the day settling around them. "All those people," Olivia mused, "offering different versions of my future, each one certain they know what's best." "And what do you think is best?" Maeve asked. Olivia considered this, watching a pair of ravens circle above the tree line. "I think I need to build something new, not reject everything from my past, but not be limited by it either." She turned to Maeve. "What you've given us isn't just shelter, it's perspective, a different way of seeing the world." "The best science comes from looking at familiar things with new eyes," Maeve replied. "Perhaps the best lives do too." The ravens called to each other, their voices echoing across the valley. In the distance, the mountain stood sentinel against the evening sky, unchanged by human dramas, yet witness to them all. "Whatever you decide," Maeve said quietly, "this cabin remains a place you can always return to. A constant in an inconstant world. It wasn't quite 'I love you.' It wasn't quite 'you are family now.' But coming from Maeve Callahan, scientist and survivor, it was perhaps something even more meaningful, a promise of belonging without conditions, of acceptance without judgment." Olivia reached over and briefly squeezed Maeve's weathered hand. "Thank you," she said simply. Above them, the ravens continued their aerial dance, black wings against the endless light of the Alaskan summer sky. Summer in Alaska brought long days of sunlight and a flourishing of life in the forest surrounding the cabin. Wild berries ripened, flowers bloomed in meadows, and animals busied themselves with the season's bounty. It was, Maeve explained, nature's way of compensating for the brief growing season, an explosion of productivity in a compressed time frame. For Olivia, it was a season of decisions and preparations. With her acceptance to the University of Alaska secured and a scholarship for student parents granted, the path forward was becoming clearer, yet practical considerations remained: housing, childcare, transportation, and navigating the complex relationships with her parents and Jackson. "One problem at a time," Maeve advised, as they sorted through university paperwork at the cabin's table. "Start with what's most essential." Housing came first. The university offered family apartments, but they were limited and expensive even with subsidies. After reviewing options, Maeve made an unexpected proposal. "I own a small house in Fairbanks," she revealed. "Been renting it out for years. The current tenants are leaving in August. You and Lily could live there." "You have a house in town?" Olivia asked, surprised. "But you always talk about hating urban environments." "Hence why I don't live there," Maeve replied dryly. "Bought it years ago when I was teaching at the university. Kept it as an investment and occasional research base during winters. The offer was generous, too generous," Olivia felt. "I can't just take your house, Maeve. I could pay rent, but with tuition and childcare." "Consider it part of your scholarship," Maeve said dismissively. "An investment in scientific education. Besides, it's just sitting there otherwise." After much discussion, they reached a compromise. Olivia would pay a nominal rent that would increase gradually as her education progressed, with the understanding that maintaining the property would count toward her contribution. With housing addressed, childcare became the next priority. The university's childcare center had a waiting list, but Olivia's status as a scholarship recipient and single parent gave her priority. Still, the hours were limited, and her class schedule would sometimes extend beyond the center's operation. This problem resolved itself in an unexpected way. During a visit to the Fairbanks house, a modest but well-maintained craftsman-style home near the university, Maeve surveyed the property with a critical eye. 2 bedrooms downstairs, study upstairs, she noted, walking through the rooms. Good light for plants, decent-sized yard for northern standards. She paused in the kitchen, tapping her fingers against the counter. The garage could be converted to a workspace. I've been meaning to organize my field journals properly. Olivia stared at her. Are you thinking of staying here too? Maeve looked uncomfortable, as she always did when discussions turned personal. Not permanently, but perhaps during the academic year. The cabin is difficult in deep winter, especially as one gets older. She straightened a cabinet door with unnecessary focus. Besides, someone needs to make sure Lily doesn't develop a scientific education gap when the childcare center closes at 5 p.m. It was the closest Maeve would come to admitting she couldn't bear to be separated from them. For Olivia, who had worried about leaving the older woman alone at the cabin, it was the perfect solution, though not without complications. Would we drive each other crazy? She wondered aloud. Living in closer quarters than the cabin? Undoubtedly, Maeve replied with surprising candor. But we've managed this far. Clear boundaries and direct communication should suffice. And so the plan evolved, a shared household in Fairbanks during the academic year, with weekends and summers at the cabin when possible. The arrangement would give Olivia support with Lily while pursuing her education, and provide Maeve with company and purpose during the months when her field research was limited by weather. Throughout these preparations, Olivia maintained cautious contact with both her parents and Jackson. The relationships were evolving slowly, with boundaries being tested and reset as needed. Her parents made tentative efforts at reconciliation, inviting Olivia and Lily for Sunday dinners that were awkward but increasingly genuine. Her father, humbled by his health scare, made more effort than her mother, who still struggled to accept Olivia's independent choices. We could help more if you'd just move back home, her mother suggested repeatedly, unable to understand why Olivia would choose a different path when the prodigal daughter option was available. I'm not coming back to be fixed, Olivia explained gently but firmly. I'm building something new, Mom. You're welcome to be part of it, but I can't return to who I was before. Jackson, meanwhile, remained a complex presence in their lives. After the initial visit, he returned several times to the cabin, gradually learning how to hold Lily, how to respond to her cues, how to be present in her life. He attended her first birthday celebration, a small gathering at the cabin with Thomas, Mackenzie, who had made the trip from Anchorage, and a few others who had become part of their extended circle. Olivia observed Jackson's interactions with Lily carefully, noting both his genuine effort and his fundamental disconnection from the daily realities of parenting. He brought gifts and energy for short visits, but showed no understanding of routines, needs, or the constant vigilance parenting required. He's trying, Thomas observed during one such visit, as they watched Jackson attempting to build a tower of blocks for Lily. Not succeeding entirely, but trying. Is that enough? Olivia wondered. That's for you to decide, Thomas replied. But remember, family comes in many forms. Some people are daily bread, present at every meal. Others are special occasions, no less important, but serving a different purpose. This perspective helped Olivia reframe her expectations. Perhaps Jackson would never be the daily presence she had once hoped Lily's father would be. But he could be something else. A connection, a perspective, a part of Lily's life that added, rather than completed. As summer progressed toward fall and university preparations intensified, an unexpected letter arrived at the cabin. The return address showed a prestigious scientific journal where Maeve had published years earlier. They want to republish some of my research, she explained after reading it, her expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. Apparently, my observations from the 1990s align with current climate models. They're calling it prescient and ahead of its time. That's wonderful, Olivia exclaimed. Your work is being recognized. Maeve shrugged, but Olivia could see she was pleased despite her attempt at nonchalance. Science catches up eventually. Truth doesn't expire. The journal's interest sparked something in Maeve, a reconnection with the broader scientific community she had abandoned decades earlier. She began corresponding with researchers, reviewing current literature, and even agreeing to a remote interview with a climate science podcast. They keep asking about my current research, she grumbled one evening, reviewing email responses, as if isolation invalidates observation. Why not show them? Olivia suggested. Your journals, your ongoing data collection, it's valuable, especially with climate change affecting the Arctic so dramatically. And who would compile and present it? I have no interest in academic politics or grant applications. What about me? Olivia proposed. As part of my studies, we could digitize your observations, create databases from your journals. It could be an independent study project. Maeve considered this, tugging thoughtfully at a strand of her silver hair. It would need faculty supervision, a formal research framework. Thomas mentioned that Professor Chen in the Environmental Sciences Department is looking for research assistants with Arctic ecosystem experience. Olivia smiled. I happen to know someone who's been teaching me about Arctic ecosystems for months now. This conversation planted another seed, one that would grow into a collaborative project spanning generations. Maeve's decades of meticulous observations would become the foundation for Olivia's academic development, creating continuity between past and future research. By August, preparations for the move to Fairbanks were well underway. The house had been cleaned and partially furnished, university registration completed, and childcare arrangements finalized. What remained was the emotional preparation, the transition from their unexpected refuge to a more structured, purposeful future. On their final evening before the move, Olivia found Maeve in Eleanor's room. The space had subtly transformed over the months. While still recognizably a nursery from another time, small changes reflected healing rather than stasis. Eleanor's photographs remained, but they had been joined by pictures of Lily. Some toys had been carefully packed away, while others had been shared with the new baby in the cabin. I never thought I'd change anything in here, Maeve said without turning. For years, it was like a time capsule, perfectly preserved grief. And now? Olivia asked gently. Now it's still Eleanor's room, but it can be more than just a memorial. She adjusted a stuffed bear on a shelf. Eleanor would be 36 now. She might have had children of her own. She wouldn't have wanted this room frozen forever. The admission represented enormous growth for a woman who had lived alongside her grief for decades without addressing it directly. Olivia recognized the courage it took for Maeve to redefine her relationship with loss while maintaining connection to her daughter's memory. Thank you, Olivia said quietly, for sharing her with us, and for letting Lily be part of her story. Maeve nodded, emotion making further words unnecessary. The move to Fairbanks marked the beginning of a new chapter. The house, while unfamiliar, quickly developed its own rhythm and character. Olivia's classes began, challenging and stimulating her mind in ways she had missed during pregnancy and early motherhood. Lily adjusted to the childcare center, developing social skills with other children, while maintaining her special bond with Maeve during evenings and weekends. Maeve herself underwent a subtle transformation in the urban setting. While still fundamentally independent and occasionally prickly, she developed unexpected connections. Several retired professors from the university, learning of her return to Fairbanks, sought her out for conversations about research. A local environmental group invited her to speak about long-term ecological observations. Most significantly, she began mentoring selected students who showed particular promise in environmental sciences. These informal sessions, often held in their living room with Lily playing nearby, became known among serious students as more valuable than official classes. Do you realize you're teaching again? Olivia asked one evening, after a particularly intense discussion with 3 graduate students about permafrost changes. I'm correcting misconceptions, Maeve replied with characteristic modesty. If that constitutes teaching, so be it. As autumn painted the birch forests golden around Fairbanks, the household settled into productive routines. Mornings were devoted to Lily's preparation for the day, a carefully choreographed dance between Olivia and Maeve. While Olivia readied herself for classes, Maeve would prepare Lily's breakfast, invariably turning even this simple task into a learning experience. Look here, Lily, Maeve would say, pointing to the berries she'd carefully measured. These are cloudberries. Notice how they're different from the raspberries we picked last summer. Each has its own ecosystem, its own story. Lily, now 3, would listen with wide-eyed fascination. She was already showing signs of the same keen observational skills that had defined Maeve's scientific career. Her toys were often arranged in meticulous patterns, her questions were precise and relentless, and she seemed to view the world as one giant puzzle waiting to be understood. As winter approached, the household settled into a rhythm that felt both unexpected and entirely natural. Olivia's academic performance was exceptional. Her research project digitizing Maeve's decades of ecological observations had caught the attention of her professors. What had started as a simple independent study had transformed into a potentially groundbreaking compilation of long-term Arctic ecosystem data. Thomas continued to be a supportive presence, often visiting during holidays or academic breaks. He had become a mentor to Olivia, providing guidance not just academically but in navigating the complex landscape of her evolving life. Jackson's involvement remained consistent but limited. He would visit every few months, bringing gifts for Lily, showing genuine affection without the daily responsibilities of parenting. Olivia had long since made peace with this arrangement, understanding that families could take many forms. Her parents' reconciliation was slow but steady. Her father had become a changed man, genuinely trying to understand and support Olivia's choices. Her mother's progress was more hesitant, but there were moments of genuine connection. carefully negotiated but real. On a crisp December evening, as snow blanketed Fairbanks, Maeve made an unexpected announcement. "I've been offered a visiting scholar position," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "A joint appointment between the university's Environmental Sciences Department and the Climate Research Center." Olivia looked up, surprised. "But you've always avoided formal academic positions." Maeve's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Times change, and apparently my decades of research are now considered valuable historical data." She rolled her eyes at the academic terminology. The position was perfect. It allowed Maeve to continue her research, mentor students, and maintain the flexible lifestyle she cherished. More importantly, it provided stability for their unconventional family. Lily, playing with a set of geological samples Maeve had carefully curated for her, looked up. "Grandma Maeve, will you teach me about rocks today?" The term grandma had emerged naturally without discussion. Maeve had never asked to be called this, but she had quietly accepted it, just as she had accepted Lily into her life and heart. "Come here," Maeve said, spreading out a collection of rock samples. "Let me show you how these stones tell stories older than any human could imagine." As the winter darkness pressed against the windows of their Fairbanks home, 3 generations sat together. A teenage mother who had defied expectations, an eccentric scientist who had found redemption, and a curious child who represented hope and continuity. Their story was far from a traditional narrative. It was messy, complex, filled with unexpected turns, but it was, undeniably, a story of love. The kind of love that chooses, that grows,